She was 9 years old, and she hadn't eaten since yesterday morning. Maya stood outside the restaurant's back door, her shoes held together with tape, her jacket 2 sizes too small for her thin shoulders. The evening air carried the smell of garlic bread and roasted chicken, and it wrapped around her like something cruel, beautiful and completely out of reach. She pressed her back against the cold brick wall and watched through the gap in the fence as the busboy carried out a large tray of untouched bread rolls, half-finished pasta, and a bowl of soup that had barely been touched. All of it moving steadily toward the garbage bin like it meant nothing. Like food meant nothing. She had learned, in her 9 years, that food meant everything. Maya counted to 3 the way her mother had taught her when fear got too loud inside her chest. 1, 2, 3. Then she straightened her jacket, smoothed down her hair with a palm, and walked around to the front of the restaurant where the outdoor tables glowed under warm string lights. Her brother Marcus sat at the alley's edge, 6 years old, his knees pulled to his chest, watching her the way he always watched her, like she was the person who held the answer to every question he'd ever have. She gave him a small nod. Then she kept walking. The man at the corner table was alone. He was the kind of alone that looked chosen, not accidental. No empty chair across from him, no second glass, just a leather portfolio, a phone face down on the white tablecloth, and a plate of food he had barely touched. He was wearing a dark suit that Maya didn't have the vocabulary to describe but somehow understood was expensive. His watch caught the light when he reached for his water glass. He looked like the kind of man who made decisions that affected people he would never meet. She was right about that. She just didn't know it yet. His name was Daniel Mercer, 42 years old. The founder of Mercer Capital Group, a firm that managed assets across 4 continents. Worth, by last quarter's estimate, just over $300 million. He had flown into the city that morning for a single meeting, checked into a hotel suite he would sleep in for exactly 1 night, and chosen this restaurant because his assistant had recommended it 3 weeks ago, before he fired her for approving a $20 supply order without his signature. He was, by every external measure, a man who had everything. He was also, in this precise moment, a man who was sitting very still and staring at nothing, because 2 hours earlier he had called his daughter on her birthday and she had let it go to voicemail. Maya didn't know any of this. She only knew that his plate had food on it, that his eyes were somewhere far away, and that she had promised Marcus she would try. She stopped 2 feet from his table. She straightened her spine the way her mother always did before walking into a room that made her nervous. And then, in a voice that was quiet but did not shake, she asked the question, "Sir, can we eat the leftovers?" She pointed toward Marcus without looking back, because she didn't want to look away from the man's face. Her mother had told her once, always look people in the eyes when you ask them something important. It tells them you're not ashamed of needing. It tells them you're just human. Daniel Mercer looked up from the middle distance where his thoughts had been drifting. And he saw her. Not the way adults usually see children who approach them in restaurants, with a flicker of irritation, a quick assessment, a reach for their wallet to make the discomfort go away. He saw her the way you see something that stops you completely. Her shoes, bound at the toe with a strip of silver tape that had started to peel. Her jacket, clearly bought for someone larger, the cuffs folded back twice so her hands could reach through. Her face, round and serious, with eyes that held a patience no 9-year-old should have to carry. And her posture. God, her posture. Straight-backed and steady, like she was standing in a place she had every right to be. She wasn't begging. That was the thing that hit him first and hardest. She was asking. There was a difference, and she knew it, and somehow that difference was the most dignified thing Daniel Mercer had witnessed in longer than he could remember. He opened his mouth. Then he closed it. In 30 years of business, Daniel had sat across from senators, executives, and billionaires who wanted something from him. He had mastered the language of negotiation, the art of reading a room, the discipline of never letting a moment catch him off guard. He had been called decisive, unsentimental, focused. He could not, in this moment, find a single word. Because something was happening to him that he hadn't planned for and couldn't explain. Something quiet and irreversible, the way a crack moves through glass before anyone notices the window is already broken. He was looking at this child and he was thinking about his daughter, who was 8 years old and had let his birthday call go to voicemail, and he was thinking about the fact that he didn't actually know what her favorite subject in school was anymore, and he was thinking about the $20 supply order, and the leather portfolio, and the 4 continents, and the hotel suite he would sleep in alone tonight. And standing in front of all of that, like a small, clear fact, was a 9-year-old girl with taped shoes asking if she and her brother could eat the food he was going to leave on the plate anyway. He looked at her cracked lips. He looked at her steady eyes. He looked at what he would later, privately, only be able to call her impossible dignity. And Daniel Mercer, who had not cried since his mother's funeral 11 years ago, felt something move dangerously close to the surface. He didn't let it show. He was too practiced for that. But something shifted in him in that moment, something that had been sitting in the same locked position for a very long time, and it moved. Quietly. Without announcement. The way the most important things always do. He pulled out the chair across from him. Not the chair at the next table. Not a chair from somewhere else. The chair directly across from his, the one with no second glass, the one that had been empty all evening. He pulled it out and then stood up and walked to the alley where Marcus was sitting with his knees pulled to his chest, and he crouched down to the boy's level and said, in the gentlest voice Maya had ever heard a stranger use, "There's a table with your name on it. You hungry?" Marcus looked at Maya. Maya nodded. And Marcus stood up and took the hand of the man he had never met, because children understand safety in ways that bypass logic entirely, and something in Daniel Mercer's voice in that moment carried it. Real, unperformed, unmistakable safety. The three of them walked back around to the front of the restaurant together. The hostess looked up with an expression that shifted 3 times in 2 seconds. Confusion, recognition of Daniel's face, professional recovery. He didn't acknowledge any of it. He just guided the children to his table, the best one in the house, warm under the string lights, and he sat back down in his chair and picked up his menu and handed one to Maya like this was the most ordinary thing in the world. Because he had decided, somewhere between the alley and the front door, that it should be. Maya held the menu in both hands. She read it slowly, carefully, the way she read everything. Her teacher said she was the best reader in her class, that she read like the words mattered, like she was saving them somewhere. She didn't look up for a long moment. Then she looked at Daniel Mercer over the top of the menu with those patient, serious eyes, and she said, very quietly, "We don't need the expensive things." And Daniel said, just as quietly, "Tonight you do." Something passed between them in that sentence, something neither of them had words for yet, but both of them felt. A recognition. A moment that was already different from every other moment in the evening, already separate from the ordinary movement of the world. Maya looked back down at the menu. Marcus was already pointing at the picture of the chocolate cake. And Daniel Mercer, $300 million and one unanswered birthday call later, picked up his phone from the tablecloth, and this time, he wasn't checking his portfolio. He was looking at a photo of his daughter. 8 years old. Gap-toothed smile. Standing in front of a birthday cake he had ordered delivered because he couldn't be there. He set the phone back down. He looked at these 2 children sitting across from him in the warm light. And for the first time in a very long time, Daniel Mercer was exactly where he was. Not planning, not managing, not deciding. Just present. Just here. Just a man at a table, at the beginning of something he didn't have a name for yet. But he already knew, with the quiet certainty of someone who has spent 30 years trusting his instincts, that this night was going to change something. He just didn't know yet how much. Daniel didn't give her the leftovers. That decision took less than a second, and it was the most certain decision he had made all day, clearer than the merger he had approved that morning, clearer than the flight plan his pilot had filed, clearer than anything that had lived inside his leather portfolio. The leftovers were not what these children needed. And for the first time in a long time, Daniel Mercer was interested in giving someone exactly what they needed. He walked them inside. The restaurant fell into that particular silence that expensive places fall into when something unexpected enters. Not a loud silence, not an unkind one, just a pause, a collective recalibration. Heads turned with the subtle choreography of people who have been trained never to stare. The maître d' moved forward with the practiced expression of a man preparing to intervene politely, and Daniel stopped him with nothing more than eye contact and the smallest shake of his head. One of the privileges of being a man like Daniel Mercer was that a single look carried the full weight of a conversation. The maître d' stepped back. The room recalibrated again. And Daniel guided Maya and Marcus to the corner table by the window, the one with the white linen cloth, the small candle, the view of the city lights beginning to bloom in the early dark. He told the waiter to bring everything. Not the prix-fixe menu. Not the children's portion. Everything. Warm soup with crusty bread on the side, a roasted chicken that arrived golden and fragrant, fresh pasta with butter and herbs, a basket of rolls that Marcus immediately reached for with both hands and then stopped, suddenly self-conscious. Daniel pushed the basket closer to him without a word. Marcus took 2 rolls and held them like they were something precious. Maya ate carefully. That was the thing Daniel couldn't stop noticing, the carefulness of it. She didn't rush, even though he could tell from the way her eyes had moved across the table when the food arrived that her body was desperate. She lifted her spoon slowly. She chewed deliberately. She tasted everything like she was memorizing it, storing it somewhere safe inside herself for a time when the memory might need to do the work the meal couldn't. It was the eating of someone who had learned, through long experience, that good things could be taken away without warning, and so you honored them while they were there. Daniel had eaten at tables like this one his entire adult life. He had never once eaten like that. He waited until she had finished most of her soup before he asked, quietly, without pressure, the way you ask someone something when the answer matters more than your need to hear it. "Where's your mom?" Maya looked up. She considered the question the way she seemed to consider everything, fully, without hurry. "Working," she said. "She has the dinner shift at the diner on 5th and then the cleaning job after. She gets home around 2. She said it without complaint, without performance. Just as a fact, the way you state the weather or the time. It was simply the architecture of their lives, and she had long since made peace with the shape of it. "She works every night?" Daniel asked. 6 nights, Maya said. "She takes Sundays off so she can wash our clothes and make a big pot of something that lasts the week." She paused, then added, with a quiet pride that filled the whole table, "She's really good at making things last." Daniel nodded slowly. He didn't trust himself to say anything immediately, so he reached for his water glass and took a long sip and looked out at the city lights and thought about a woman he had never met, a woman who worked until 2 in the morning 6 nights a week and spent her one day off making a pot of food last 7 days, and who had somehow raised a daughter with that posture, those eyes, that voice that didn't shake. He thought about his own mother. The way she used to stretch $1 across a whole week when he was young, before everything changed. He had not thought about that in years. He had been very busy not thinking about it. "Does she know you came here tonight?" he asked. Maya was quiet for one beat. "She knows I take care of Marcus when she's working." She looked at her brother, who had demolished both rolls and was now staring at the chocolate cake that had just arrived at a nearby table with the focused intensity of a small scientist observing a critical experiment. "She says don't beg. She says we are not people who beg." "You didn't beg," Daniel said. Maya met his eyes. "I know," she said simply. "I was just asking." And there it was again, that sentence, that distinction, that line she had drawn with such quiet precision between need and shame. Daniel had spent 30 years in rooms full of people who wanted things from him, and not one of them had ever made the distinction with that kind of clarity. Most people who wanted something from Daniel Mercer performed not wanting it first. They dressed their need in strategy, in confidence, in carefully constructed narratives of mutual benefit. They made wanting something feel like an embarrassment to be hidden. This 9-year-old had walked up to his table in taped shoes and asked a clean, direct question, and called it exactly what it was. He excused himself. He told them he'd be right back, that the chocolate cake was coming whether they ordered it or not, and he walked through the restaurant to the back hallway where the restrooms were, and he stood alone at the sink and ran cold water over his hands for a long time. He looked at himself in the mirror. He was not a man given to sentiment. He had built his entire career on the principle that emotion was information, not instruction. You noted it, you filed it, you moved on. He had applied this principle to contracts, to negotiations, to relationships, to the slow erosion of his marriage, to the birthday call his daughter had let go to voicemail this afternoon. He was very good at noting things and moving on. But the cold water ran over his hands and he looked at his own face in the mirror and he thought about Maya eating carefully, storing the memory of good food somewhere safe. He thought about Marcus holding 2 bread rolls like they were precious. He thought about a woman he had never met, coming home at 2 in the morning to children who were already asleep, checking on them in the dark. And he thought about his foundation. The Mercer Education Foundation. 6 years old. $17 million in funding. A full-time staff of 8 people who ran scholarship programs, after-school initiatives, and emergency family assistance across 3 cities. Daniel had written the first check personally. He had sat in a single board meeting at the beginning, shaken some hands, approved the mission statement, and then returned to the business of running a $300 million firm. He had not been back since. He had not thought about it much since. He dried his hands. He reached into the inside pocket of his jacket and found one of his personal cards. Not the business card with the firm's logo, but the smaller, simpler card with nothing on it but his name and a phone number. He turned it over. He borrowed a pen from the hostess station on his way back through the restaurant, and he wrote on the back of the card the address of the Mercer Foundation's main office and below it, in his clean, precise handwriting, 2 words, "Ask for Elena." Elena Vasquez had run the foundation since its 2nd year. She was, by all accounts from people who knew more about it than Daniel did, extraordinary at her job. She had called his office 4 times in the past year with updates he had never responded to personally. He had let his assistant handle it each time. He walked back to the table. The chocolate cake had arrived. Marcus had a smear of frosting at the corner of his mouth and the expression of someone who has just experienced a religious conversion. Maya was watching her brother with a smile that transformed her whole face, soft and unguarded and completely unself-conscious, the smile of someone who finds more joy in someone else's happiness than in their own. Daniel sat down. He waited until Marcus had taken a second forkful before he slid the card across the table to Maya. "Give this to your mom," he said. "Tell her to go to that address and ask for the woman whose name I wrote down. They help families. With school, with other things. Tell your mom it's not charity." He paused, then chose the word carefully. "Tell her it's a resource." Maya picked up the card and looked at it for a long moment. She read both sides slowly. In that careful way she read everything. Then she tucked it into the inside pocket of her too large jacket, pressing it flat against her chest with her palm, the way you secure something you can't afford to lose. She looked up at him. "Thank you," she said. The 2 words were simple and complete and carried no performance in them whatsoever. "Thank you," Daniel said. And he meant it in a way he didn't fully understand yet. They finished the meal quietly, the 3 of them, in the warm light of the corner table. Marcus fell asleep in his chair before the check arrived, his head tilted sideways, one hand still loosely curled around his fork. Maya sat across from Daniel with her hands folded on the table, patient and awake, keeping watch the way she always did. Daniel looked at her and thought about Elena Vasquez's 4 unanswered calls. He thought about the foundation he had funded and forgotten. He thought about $17 million moving through a city, doing work he had never once stopped to witness. He picked up his phone. Not to check the markets. Not to review tomorrow's schedule. He opened his contacts and found Elena's number. It was there, filed under F for Foundation, untouched for 11 months, and he typed a single message. "I'd like to come in. This week if possible. I'll explain when I see you." He set the phone down. Outside the window, the city moved in its ordinary way, indifferent, relentless, full of people making their way through the dark towards something they hoped was waiting on the other side. Daniel Mercer sat at his table in the warm light and watched a 6-year-old boy sleep with chocolate frosting on his face, and felt, for the first time in longer than he could honestly measure, that he was pointed in the right direction. He didn't know yet what he would find when he walked through the Foundation's doors. He didn't know what Elena would tell him about the families they served, the children on the waiting lists, the programs that needed more than funding, that needed presence, attention, someone who showed up. He didn't know that Maya's mother would walk into that office 11 days from now, still in her diner uniform, and that Elena would recognize something in her immediately and make a single call that would change the entire direction of their lives. He didn't know any of that yet. He only knew that a 9-year-old girl had walked up to his table with taped shoes and steady eyes, and had asked a clean and honest question, and that the answer he had chosen had led him here, to this table, this light, this feeling of being, for the first time in years, exactly where he was supposed to be. Sometimes the most important doors in a person's life don't announce themselves. Sometimes they look like a child standing at the edge of your table, asking if she can eat the leftovers. And the only question that matters is what you do next.